It was Tim Keller, I think, who said, "You cannot think Jesus is nice." Now, I don't know if you've ever tried thinking that, but nice, it's just not the right label for Jesus. Though some sentimental Christmas songs about baby Jesus and the sheep and the cattle do kind of attempt it, and Christmas cards, I guess, the cute kid, nice, the baby lambs and the baby calves kind of frolic around his cradle. I guess we like to sentimentalise, we like to make Jesus cute and containable, and for most people it seems that is all the Jesus they want. But the fact is, behind all the sentimentality, a nice, containable Jesus just is not an option. C.S. Lewis said something similar about people who like to say Jesus was a great moral teacher with lots of nice things to say. Lewis says a man who was merely a man and said the sort of things Jesus said would not be a great moral teacher. He would either be, and you might remember these words, a lunatic on the level with the man who says he's a poached egg, says Lewis, or he goes on to say, or else he would be a liar and a con man on an incredible scale. Or if he's not one of those two options, says Lewis, then he is much, much more than a great moral teacher. He is Lord, as he claims. Lord, liar, or lunatic. But not innocuous. Not just a teacher, not just somebody nice. Which is, when you think about it, something that King Herod seemed to have grasped right from day one. This is a guy who is certainly far from sentimental. We have just heard him give the order to kill babies in an effort to get rid of the baby Jesus, which is right in keeping with the style that he's famous for in history. They called him Herod the Great. He's remembered for his great ambition, although even though Matthew in verse 3 does call him King Herod, he is not really a king at all, and he's not really that great either. He's just a local governor. He is a petty tyrant who is full of ambition. And is remembered in history. He's noted by Roman historians for his incredible paranoia, his fear that people are plotting to take his power. And he's remembered most of all for his incredible cruelty driven by that paranoia. Herod is remembered as the guy who killed his wife because he thought she was plotting against him. At the same time, he killed his mother-in-law as well, and for good measure, his two stepsons at the same time. Not long after that, Herod killed his own son for exactly the same reason, because he is suspicious that there's a plot and his son is going to take his power. Look, even Caesar back in Rome is uncomfortable with the way Herod carries on. Augustus Caesar himself is quoted as saying, "I would rather be Herod's pig than his son," which under the circumstances you could easily understand. Not an ounce of sentiment in this man, not a gram of compassion, not a millilitre of sympathy, if that's how you measure sympathy. If there is any danger of opposition, if there is a whiff of any other authority, Herod is going to snuff it out, no matter what the cost to anyone else. Let's look at it closer in Matthew chapter 2, because there is one thing that Herod's got right. The authority that this child Jesus is going to go on to claim, the stand he is going to take, Herod is seeing very clearly that you can't just brand him as innocuous and nice and then go on and ignore him. The news of the birth of Jesus, the news of his arrival in Israel, to Herod, it has got threat written all over it, which is actually closer to the truth than you might realise. When Herod hears the rumours, he doesn't write him off as a liar, he doesn't laugh him off as a lunatic. Herod sees exactly what the visiting magi from the east see, that there is a potential Lord here. And he takes the only step he can take in the light of that, as he sees it, which are in a way brutally logical, the steps he takes. If he's going to keep hold of power himself, then he's got to do something. And here we are right at the start of Matthew's Gospel, a Jesus not even out of nappies, and we are face to face with the logical outcome of the clash of two kingdoms between Herod, the fake king of Israel, and Jesus, the real one. Let's follow through from verse 1. And if it helps, you can think Christmas thoughts, as we did last time in chapter 1. Jesus, born in Bethlehem, just out of Jerusalem, in the time of King Herod. Except in spite of what the Christmas cards and the carols want to tell you, it's interesting. Do you notice we're not at any point told that there are 3 wise men? Just a little while later, there are 3 gifts. But not that there are 3 magi from the east. That number's never mentioned anywhere. And the scene is not set in the cowshed where Jesus is born, but later in a house. In fact, most likely, up to 2 years later, judging by Herod's actions a little bit down the track. But forget the cards and the carols for a moment. Look at what the Bible says. We're told the Magi, these scholars, these astronomers from the east, they arrive in Jerusalem because they've been following a star, probably from Iraq, which back then was still Babylon, where Israel in the olden days was in exile. Times have changed. See, now here are Babylonians coming to pay homage in Israel, which is exactly what the prophet said would one day happen. Here are the wisest of Babylon now coming to Israel. Here are the envoys of Iraq. I reckon it would raise eyebrows even more these days, bowing down before an Israelite. But when they get to Jerusalem, they're at the centre of a storm of a different kind. They're asking around the city, a little bit naive maybe, where is the one born King of the Jews? Expecting maybe a street parade and celebrations at the palace of Herod. They say, we saw his star in the east and we've come to worship him. We have literally come to throw ourselves down before him, to get down on our knees and pay homage. Now, straight away, there's a problem, isn't there? You can see it tied up in those first 2 verses because there's one little word that starts with the letter K and it comes up once too often. It's the word king. You've got King Herod, who under Caesar is king of the Jews, and now this other one, king of the Jews as well. There are lots of things you should probably only have one of. One wife, that's best. One diary to keep your appointments in, that's best. You get confused otherwise. Well, for Herod, it's very simple. There should only be one king, and it's him. Verse 3, when King Herod hears the questions they're asking, Matthew says he's disturbed and all Jerusalem with him. The gossip network is buzzing. So Herod calls in the experts, the chief priests and teachers of the law, and he asks them one question. Where is this Christ, this anointed one? Where is this new king meant to be born? He's not asking just to be helpful to the Magi. He's not asking just because he's curious. And in spite of his words in verse 7, he is not asking because he's had a change of heart. Now, the answer to his question is Bethlehem. It says so in the scriptures. So verse 7, Herod calls in the wise men secretly. He finds out exactly when the star first appeared, how long they've been on their journey. Then he tells them to go to Bethlehem and to find this new king and to come back and tell him about it, because he says with a sly sort of smile on his face, I want to go and worship him too. King Herod, famous for exterminating opposition, it couldn't be further from the truth. Now, let's leave Herod for a moment and take a look at the new king on the block. Pick up from verse 9, because the Magi follow the star from Jerusalem out on the road to Bethlehem, and it stops over the place where the child is. And verse 11, on coming to the house, finally found him. They see the child and his mother Mary, and they bow down and they worship him. And they open their treasure boxes, and it's a royal baby shower with gold, with incense, with exotic spices. They opened their treasures, verse 11, and they presented him with gifts of gold and incense and of myrrh, the most valuable stuff they've got. These are gifts fit for a king. Because they knew, even looking at this, maybe a 2-year-old child by now, they know they are face to face with an authority far higher than Herod. And then, because God warns them in a dream, verse 12 says they head home east by the back road, and they don't report back to him like they said they would, and they leave Herod in the lurch. Follow the story through. Herod sees they've slipped through his fingers. True to form, he goes into damage control. Verse 13, God warns Joseph in a dream, take the child and his mother to Egypt and stay there. Herod wants to kill him. And it's exactly the path Herod sets down. True to form, here is the petty local tyrant who thinks nothing of killing his own family to make sure his rule is unchallenged. It is nothing for him to give the order to kill all the boys in Bethlehem aged under 2, just to get rid of the threat of Jesus. Because he knows, just as well as the Magi knew, there's one here who isn't just nice, there's an authority here. And if you don't exclude him and do your best to stamp him out, he might end up ruling the world. Might end up ruling over even you. And Herod, you see, won't have that at any cost. This is one of the most terrible scenes in the Bible. Pharaoh did something similar when he's trying to stamp out the Israelites back in Egypt, kills all the baby boys. But at that time, the great leader Moses is preserved. Well, same story. And it's actually to Egypt where Joseph and the family go. And they stay there maybe a year or more until an angel again in a dream tells Joseph that Herod is safely dead. They can go back. And the family moves back to Galilee in the town of Nazareth where they settle. Now that's what happens on the surface of things. But I want to take you just for a very quick tour behind the scenes this morning, because Matthew keeps loading up the story with hints. Jesus is King of the Jews, but he's more than that. He is more than just a king, and he's here for more than just the Jews. And Herod, you see, is more right than he perhaps even realised. I wonder if you've noticed in this chapter how Matthew constantly points something out. He constantly tells us that things are happening for a reason, that things are happening to fulfil prophecy, that they're happening according to a shape and a plan that's already there in the Old Testament scriptures. Verse 5, look again. How do you know where the Messiah, where the coming King of Israel, is going to be born? You look at the scriptures, Micah chapter 5. You've got to be a bit of an expert or have a good index system to find it. But Herod's experts can tell him straight away. He's going to be born in Bethlehem in Judea, they replied, for this is what the prophet's written. And they quoted chapter and verse right from Micah chapter 5, verse 2. And you get the same thing. Jesus is taken down to Egypt. There's another prophecy that Matthew wants you to notice, written the first time about God's chosen son, Israel, the nation precious to him, called out of Egypt. Now it's an Israel of one. Now it really is his son. Matthew says, and so was fulfilled what the Lord had said through the prophet, out of Egypt I called my son. Hosea 11 verse 1. And again in verse 17, notice there, then what was said through the prophet Jeremiah was fulfilled. And he quotes it, the inconsolable weeping over the destruction of Israel's children. And yet as Jeremiah tells it, when you go back and look, it's a weeping that is about to be consoled. It's the darkness, Jeremiah says, that comes just before the dawn. Weeping and mourning. But the Lord says to them in the very next verse back in Jeremiah, but stop your crying now. Dry your eyes now, because hope is about to dawn. Finally, the very last verse of the chapter in Matthew, verse 23, and so was fulfilled through the prophets. Yet again, he'll be called a Nazarene. Every detail, every step, Matthew wants us to see that it's according to plan. And all God's promises for Israel are about to be fulfilled in Jesus. Because now at last, after their crushing exile in Babylon, after their hundreds of years of trying to get back on their feet, after all the years of Roman rule, after being crushed for so long by the consequences of their sin, the promises of blessing are about to bear fruit. Now, I mentioned a number of Old Testament passages there. I want to just drill even deeper now into just one of those passages, Micah chapter 5, the first one. And Matthew's given us a glimpse. But the usual rule in the New Testament, when you get a prophecy quoted from the Old Testament, you're actually meant to go back and read it in context, which is a good rule for just about anything, isn't it? Read it in context. This prophecy that tells Herod's experts where the king is going to be born says a whole lot more about him as well. And when you see that, it is no wonder that Herod wants to be rid of him. Either that, or he'll have to bow down to him. It's hundreds of years before that Micah's writing. Assyrian invaders are about to tear Israel apart. They're about to scatter Israel around the other nations like Jew. But Micah says, through all that, remember that there are much better times to come. There are incredible times up ahead. There it is, the passage from Micah on the screen. And there it is highlighted. Those key words that we saw, but you, Bethlehem Ephrathah, little town out in the sticks, out of you will come for me one who will be ruler over Israel, says God. We know that much. But there's more. This king from Bethlehem is no ordinary king. Somehow he's been there from the very start. Read his words. His origins are from old, from ancient times, from the very beginning. Then what about verse 4? Micah says there's going to be a birth, there's going to be a restoration, and then he will stand and shepherd his flock in the strength of the Lord, in the majesty of the name of the Lord his God. This king is going to be one who rules with all the strength and authority of the power of God himself. And more than that, keep reading, his people, says Micah, will live securely, for then his greatness will reach the ends of the earth, and he will be their peace. Now, do you see that everywhere, the ends of the earth? And Matthew says to us, this is the one who's arrived. Not just going to be king over little Israel, king over everywhere. Not just nice, not just a sentimental baby in a cowshed. His greatness will reach the ends of the earth. I mean, why do you think these magi have come all the way from Babylon to pay tribute? And you see, when Herod understands that, he says, no way. I don't care who he is. I've got to stop him if I want to be boss of me and everything else. I don't care who he is. I'm not going to worship him. I'm going to eliminate him. Interesting, isn't it, that right here at the start of the story in Matthew chapter 2, Jesus, just a little kid, you get a picture of what's coming up ahead. And two very clear options. And no sooner is he born, and born to bring all those good things under his rule, no sooner is he born that the rulers of Israel want to spit him back. John's Gospel puts it this way: he came to that which was his own, but his own received him not. Which is exactly how it almost plays out at the end of the story too, isn't it, if you know it? And as we read through Matthew's Gospel, we'll see it unfolding that the religious leaders, that the rulers, that the political system of Israel, they crucify him. And this time he doesn't escape. He submits to death, but then escapes from death. But you see, they don't want to give up their own authority. Like Herod, no rivals to them, the leaders of Israel. Even if it's God himself. Now, I wonder if for any of you this morning, whether that maybe describes you too. I mean, sure, you can't go out and try to kill him literally, and you're probably not quite mean enough to want to do that. But the underlying attitude, you see, may well be the same, that you do not want a rival, that you do not want someone else to tell you how to live your life. You don't want someone to submit to because you'd rather do things your way than his. Now, that's certainly the way our culture's going. It's certainly the way the media is going in a frenzy. Any excuse to bring down Christians, any excuse to bring down Jesus, any excuse to bring down the church. It's almost manic. But I'm not here to talk about everyone else. I'm here to talk about you. Maybe just saying week after week, year after year, I will think about him later. Because in the meantime, you're just too busy thinking about you and getting ahead and getting comfortable. Kind of sensing that bowing to Jesus is going to cost you. Because then he'd be at the centre and you wouldn't. Well, of course it'll cost you. Maybe you do it by just trying to domesticate Jesus to the level of nice. A hobby, perhaps. Maybe just mouthing off those words about the way you are. Oh, he's such a great teacher. Doesn't work. his greatness will reach to the end of the earth. He is great, not trivial. Which is obvious, isn't it, to these wise guys from Babylon who have travelled all this way just to see him. They come face to face with Jesus with great joy, and they know exactly what to do. It says there back in Matthew 2 verse 11, they bow down to him, they pay tribute, they open up their treasure, they treat him as king. This little kid, which is a much smarter option than King Herod. Much more fitting to say, this is our master, this is our ruler, this is our king. This Jesus is who we worship. This is who we serve with our whole lives with exceeding joy. You know, this is the start of a thread that finds its way all the way through Matthew's Gospel. These foreigners, right at the start, they've got it right already in a way others take a whole lot longer to figure out. You get to Matthew 14 where Jesus has walked on the water. He gets in the boat, he stills the wind. And you see these words. Then those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, truly you are the Son of God. From what he's done at that moment, they get just a little glimpse of who he really is. But the bigger view comes later, Matthew chapter 28, when the women have come from the tomb and they come face to face with Jesus in the garden, and suddenly Jesus met them. Greetings, he said. They came to him, clasped his feet, and worshipped him. Liar, lunatic, or Lord? If it is Lord, there is no room for lukewarm. If you're a committed self-worshipper like Herod, you won't do it with the same brutality he did, I guess, but you'll see his logic, won't you? You will want to suppress Jesus or be rid of Jesus or domesticate Jesus however you can, because there is only room for one boss in your life, and that's you. You might do it politely, but you'll be politely not just pushing aside Jesus, but anybody who doesn't suit your agenda and your interests and your lifestyle, because you're so busy looking after number one. And when Jesus calls you to humble yourself and to trust him and have your sins forgiven and to start living for him and serving others in a way that shows who you worship, you won't do it, will you? Unless you're wise, in which case you will. Jesus comes, Herod wants to be rid of him. The wise travellers from the east search for him until they find him and they bow down and worship him. So which one are you?